And I think we are live and good to go. Good morning, good afternoon, salutations and greetings wherever you may be joining me from. Um, Here we are at another week of the Heart of Many Chambers, this sort of 4 week session, preparing ourselves during the month of Elul for many of the themes and much of the work that we'll be doing over the course of the High Holy Days. Once again, my name is Rabbi Ross Levy. I am your humble host and guide through this 4 week session, and we have arrived at week 3. It's hard to believe, but we're only a couple of weeks out from Rosh Hashanah, and time is moving by fast. And you'll notice that I'm in a little bit of a different setting this week. I'm home in my apartment as opposed to in the office, but happy that technology allows us to be able to learn and engage with one another wherever we may be. So, for those of you joining us, I encourage you to go check out the past sessions first and foremost. If you go to the homepage of Kol Ami, kol-ami.org, you can find if you scroll down a little bit, you can find video recordings and the PDF source sheets for each of the previous sessions. And that's also where you can find today's source sheet. We should be live on Facebook here, and hopefully we'll have the link to the source sheet posted in the comments section. But for those who might not be joining on Facebook or might be joining on YouTube or whatever it might be, go to the homepage, kol-ami.org, and scroll down, you'll find the source sheet for today. So, as a quick review of the past couple of weeks, the first week we talked about chesed, we talked about kindness. And we talked about how the root for chesed is grounded in this notion of abundance. Of when we have more than what we need, we give to others. And I think that that's a good place to start when we're talking about these different chambers of the hearts, because I think that is something so ingrained with all of us. If you look at, if you spend any time with young children, you see that they're often very, very excited to be able to give you things and share things with you. And unfortunately, life experiences and time sort of stiffens up that part of our heart and makes it less and less easy for us to give. Of course, also, we have to maintain our own needs, and that actually segues into the last week's where we talked about omets, we talked about strength. And the idea is you can't just give and give and give and give, or constantly be seeking after the needs of others. You also have to turn to your own needs and your own strength in order to be able to give in the world, and to be able to live and be able to take care of yourself and be able to guard against a lot of the negative emotions, the negative experience that are kind of inevitable. You know, we're going to experience negativity, but it's about building up that strength and that resilience within ourselves to encounter that, to push through that, and to come out better for it on the other side. So we explored some great texts there. And this week we are turning to Rachamim, which I've translated as compassion. It can also mean mercy. And if you take a gander at your source sheet, you see I began with this passage from Psalm 145. Psalm 145 might be more well known to folks as Ashrei. In the morning services, we recite the different alphabetical acrostic verses of them. And one of them, verse 9, says, Tov Adonai lakol v'rachamav al kol ma'asav. The Eternal is good to all. God's mercy, God's rachamim, this word that we're focusing on, is upon all of God's works. And when we talk about rachamim, one thing I want to point out before we dive into the text, because I think it's something important to note. You'll see it in many different sources. It was actually tough putting together these sources for today because there's so many different ones to be able to cull through. And you know me, I like to bring in some contemporary sources as well. And so we have some of those. But one of the things I wanted to talk about before we dive in about this word rachamim is that it is a plural word. That's usually how we use it, rachamim, meaning, I guess, compassions. But it comes from the Hebrew root rechem, resh chet mem, which literally means womb. And so rachamim and compassion and mercy is seen as tied in with the life-bringing nature of God, the life-bringing nature of the universe, that actually bringing people into this world is an act of compassion, an act of mercy. In that when we are going through times of trouble and when we want to offer, or if someone we know is going through difficult times and we want to offer some compassion, that we're sort of bringing them back to that safe and comfortable place of birth and of creation. And so I wanted to bring this as slightly related, maybe a little bit more tangential, but I wanted to bring a musical version, a very well-known musical version of Modeh Ani. And Modeh Ani is this blessing that we are supposed to, that every Jew is supposed to recite upon waking up in the morning. And it reads, Modeh Ani lefanecha, I am grateful to you, or Modah, if you're a woman. Melech Chai V'Kayam, living and everlasting God, Shehecha Zarta Bi, Nishmati, for restoring Nishmati, for restoring my soul within me, B'chemla, with mercy or with compassion, Rabba Emunatecha, great is your faithfulness. And that might seem like a kind of strange place to end a prayer, Rabba Emunatecha, but I think it's actually a really powerful couple of words, because it's denoting that God is placing faith in us, placing trust in us to use the time that we are granted well. So without further ado, sing along with me. This is the version by Jeff Klepper and Danny Freelander. I didn't get a chance to go to a summer camp this past summer where you'll hear this, I would imagine, pretty frequently. So I wanted to take the opportunity to sing it with you this morning. Modeh Ani. Modeh Ani lefanecha, Melech Chai V'Kayam, Shehechezarta Bi Nishmati B'chemla, B'chemla, Rabba Emunatecha, Rabba Emunatecha. One more time. Modeh Ani lefanecha, Melech Chai V'Kayam, Shehechezarta Bi Nishmati B'chemla, B'chemla, Rabba Emunatecha, Rabba Emunatecha. Melody definitely brings back some memories. That's what I was looking for. Maybe reminisce as well, but hope you enjoyed that little bright energy to bring us into the morning, or at least the morning here on the West Coast in sunny Los Angeles. All right, so and again, this idea of being restored to life each morning in the ancient world, and we know this from the Talmud, or late ancient world. There was a belief that sleep was kind of like a mini death, a small death, and that when we were restored to life, it's kind of like a mini resurrection, and and we begin this new life with gratitude, with offering gratitude for the opportunity to go out and live in the world once again. I wanted to bring those who have joined in for the past few sessions. I've been leaning heavily or bringing a lot of quotes from Brene Brown, who writes really powerfully about a lot of the things that we're exploring sort of our internal lives, what it means to unpack trauma and shame and grief and empathy, and what it means to sort of do the work to strive to be better as we prepare to move into this period where that's exactly what we're charged to do, what our tradition, what our religion charges us to do, which is to look in the mirror, to dig deep, and to be better. And so, um, compassion, rachamim, is often something that we think of as extending to other people. You know, if you think about the translation that I gave and being connected with rechem and womb, it's about giving life and giving energy to other people. But there's also those of us who have had experience with therapy and with the important sort of work that we do to um, make sure that we're okay and give ourselves the opportunity to vent and recharge. Know that it's also really important to give compassionate energy to ourselves, to be forgiving of ourselves. Now, next week we're going to talk directly about forgiveness, which is where all of this is kind of leading. But the importance of self-compassion, of not being so hard on ourselves, even as we expect ourselves to do better, but to say, hey, we're not perfect. Give ourselves a little bit of some slack, a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. And Brene Brown in 2012 writes, self-compassion is key because when we're able to be gentle with ourselves in the midst of shame, in the midst of those times where we might be beating ourselves up, we're more likely to reach out, to connect, and experience empathy. If we're able to be kind to ourselves, we're able to be more open to the kindness of others. And I think that's a really powerful notion, something that I try to work on in terms of not being too harsh on myself, because oftentimes that can be detrimental, and you're damaging and you're sort of abusing yourself to the point where there isn't that opportunity for healing and for growth. So, of the many different Jewish texts that we have describing compassion, which really is seen as being related to God, we believe in a compassionate and gracious God. I wanted to highlight a couple of these examples. So here we have from the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Shabbat 151b. It was taught in a Baraita that Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Judah the Prince, who was the one who compiled the Mishnah around 200 CE. His son, Rabbi Gamliel, says, the verse that states, God will show you mercy and have compassion on you and multiply you, teaches us that anyone who has compassion for God's creatures will receive compassion from heaven. Anyone who does not have compassion for God's creatures will not receive compassion from heaven. I thought this was a really nice teaching in being a different encapsulation of, treat others the way you want to be treated. And the idea of a reciprocal and almost we could see it as being similar to a karmic view of life, that the way that we treat others, and I appreciate that he says all living beings, not just human beings, but the world, the earth, animals, plants, whatever it is, that we will be met by as much kindness as we show. And for a God that is abounding in kindness, abounding in compassion and mercy, it would make sense that God sort of expects us to mimic those abilities during our time. In something that I've mentioned before, something that really grounds a lot of these texts when we're talking about rachamim, when we're talking about compassion, is the notion that we are supposed to be, in many ways, like God. Obviously, we could never be like God, and many medieval theologians and even modern theologians would cringe at saying something like that. But in the mindset of many of our ancient sages, the idea is that what do we know about God? God created the world out of love and compassion. God visits the sick. God feeds the hungry. God clothes the naked. All of these types of things, and they point to examples from the text, we are supposed to emulate in our own lives. And in that way, we are fulfilling our responsibility, our duty as a kingdom of priests, as a holy nation, all of that kind of thing. And not just leaving all of the work being up to God, but actually taking on a portion of the work for ourselves. And similarly, as we connect this idea of rachamim with creation, um, there's this teaching from Chagiga, also from the Babylonian Talmud. Rav Zutra Bar Tuvia says in the name of Rav, the world was created through 10 attributes: through wisdom, through Chochmah, through understanding, Bina, through knowledge, Da'at, through strength, Gvura, through rebuke. I'd have to look up the Hebrew translation of that one. Through might, through righteousness, through justice, through kindness, and through mercy. Now, those of you familiar with mysticism will have your ears perked up at the notion of these 10 attributes, or one might think of them as the different sefirot. Obviously, this is a trend we see throughout Jewish tradition, but I just wanted to point this out because for our tradition, rachamim, compassion, is ingrained in the universe as much as justice, and as much as we love to talk about justice, and as much as wisdom and understanding and knowledge, that it's not just about knowing everything or having power over a thing, but it's about being kind and compassionate to one another, to the world around us. And as we're moving into this reflective season, to ourselves. And I think being compassionate with ourselves also allows us to be okay with the fact that we're not perfect, that we have many things that we need to keep working on, that we have things we need to get better at, things maybe we don't need to do as much. I know I have the things that I'm working on, and I think one of the powers of Elul is it opens up these conversations. We can talk about these things a little bit more openly, or at least it gives us more time to talk about it before we get to more of kind of like the high pressure. Oh, we're in Rosh Hashanah, or we're in Yom Kippur, we're seeking forgiveness. We have to dive deep and talk about these really, really often things that are oftentimes really difficult to speak about. I'm going to turn my microphone up. Hope everyone can hear me. But giving ourselves a month before to do that gives us time to sort of warm up, to get ourselves ready, and also to not hold on to as much stuff. We know that the longer we hold on to things, we don't express them, that the more they can tear us up inside. And I wanted to bring an example of our notion of God being compassionate, and this is actually a really important element of this month of Elul. Many folks, I know here at Congregation Kol Ami this weekend, will be observing Slichot. For those who grew up in Sephardi or Mizrahi communities, you're doing Slichot a little bit more often over the course of the month of Elul. But we get this passage from Exodus 34, Adonai Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun. It's very, very common. Eternal God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generation. So this is a passage that we use a lot over the course of the High Holy Days, particularly as we particularly chant it in front of an open ark as a way of beseeching God's kindness and compassion, as sort of as part of the traditional belief that the decree or the book of this next year is about to be opened and inscribed and sort of set in ink. But even as we might have this fear and trepidation about God's judgment, we also call on God's compassion. We also call on the compassion that we are able to give, the compassion we can give others by forgiving them, the compassion we can give ourselves by finding ways to forgive ourselves. There's just a lot that's really powerful here. And continuing with some of the morning blessings, I wanted to bring this Asher Yatzar, written by Dan Nichols. And I think he highlights this notion of brokenness, of imperfection, really well. And it's connected to the blessing that we say in the morning, um, which concludes Rofecho Basar Mafli Lasot, who heals all flesh and imbues it with the wondrous ability to do things. And thanking God for our physical bodies, as well as in Elohai Neshama, sort of its companion blessing for the holiness within us, for our souls. So I hope you'll join along. Once again, those of you who want to grab the source sheet, please do so. Go to kol-ami.org, scroll down a little bit till you find week 3, Rachamim, and there it will be waiting for you. Sorry, just getting my my computer to do what I want it to, which sometimes it doesn't. That's okay. Sometimes technology is just like that. Can't live with it. Can't live without it. Or at least these days. Whoa. I thank you for my life, body and soul. Help me realize I'm beautiful and whole. I'm perfect the way I am, and a little broken too. I will live each day as a gift I give to you. Baruch atah Adonai Rofei kol asav v'laso Baruch atah Adonai Rofei kol asav v'laso. Which ends with woes. Whoa. 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 So that'll be it for the singing for today. Hope it brought a little bit of gratitude, a little bit opened up some of that compassion that we know that we're born with, but oftentimes can get kind of covered up by other things. As a final reading, I wanted to bring this poem that is actually kind of new to me. It's by Emma Lazarus, of course, of Statue of Liberty fame, a very well-known Jewish poet from the early 20th century, and she writes this poem, Sympathy. Now, we could get into a much longer conversation about what's considered sympathy, what's compassion, what's empathy, um, all of those types of things. And over the course of time, people have used language differently and it means something different. But I think she encapsulates sympathy here, but also a sense of compassion, a sense of being with people going through difficult times. And yeah, so Sympathy by Emma Lazarus. It comes not in such wise as she had deemed, else might she still have clung to her despair. More tender, grateful than she could have dreamed, fond hands past pitying over brows and hair, and gentle words borne softly through the air, calming her weary sense and wildered mind, by welcome dear communion with her kind. Ah, she forswore all words as empty lies, what speech could help, encourage, or repair. Yet when she meets these grave, indulgent eyes, fulfilled with pity, simplest words are fair, caressing, meaningless, that do not dare to compensate or mend, but merely soothe with hopeful visions after bitter truth. One who through conquered trouble had grown wise to read the grief unspoken, unexpressed, the misery of the blank and heavy eyes, or through youth's infinite compassion guessed the heavy burden, such a one brought rest, and bade her lay aside her doubts and fears, while the hard pain dissolved in blessed tears. There's a lot to unpack here, and I hope you'll respond to maybe what this makes you think of in the comment section on Facebook, YouTube, wherever you might be joining. But so she's referring to this woman or seemingly a woman in third person, talking about sort of her reluctance to receiving sympathy and compassion. And it kind of caught her off guard, more tender and grateful than she could have dreamed. And after she had forswore all words as empty lies, as these words of comfort as being empty and meaningless. But by the end of the poem, she has come to accept it. And I think there's a really powerful passage in the second stanza here. Fulfilled with pity, simplest words are fair, caressing, meaningless, that do not dare to compensate or mend, but merely soothe with hopeful visions after bitter truth. And I think there's a lot of power in that, in the sense of when we offer people compassion, when we offer people our sympathy, our empathy, it's not about giving things that will fix that feeling for them, or make it, or even mend it, or make it better, or heal it in some way. Rather, we offer words of comfort, words of soothing, as she writes, but merely soothe with hopeful visions after bitter truth, with visions of hope. And what we can do by being with people and being with ourselves in those moments and offering compassion is allow for hope to reemerge. We offer a fertile ground for hope, and that the things will get better. And I think that if we remember the connection between rachamim and rechem and creation, and this idea of compassion being related to new life and being created anew, then we can think about the everlasting hope that is sort of implanted in the world, that with each generation we have a new hope to make things better. And that part of this ongoing act of creation is by accepting and reflecting the compassion that the world has to give. Unfortunately, the world can be really harsh, it can be really difficult, and compassion can be hard to find and hard to cultivate at times. But that's why we have poetry. That's why we have art, that's why we have music, and that's also why we have so many of these texts in our tradition that seek to facilitate the compassion within us. And so I hope that over the next couple of weeks we can turn inwards and open up that chamber, clean out that chamber of our heart, and allow ourselves to be more giving of compassion, being more compassionate to others, and especially more compassionate to ourselves. So with that, we'll conclude this week's Heart of Many Chambers. I don't have the shofar with me, so I can't physically call you to open up the passage of Rachamim, but I hope that you've enjoyed our study together. I hope it's facilitated some interesting reflections, some thoughts. Again, please leave some comments on Facebook, and be on the lookout for the recording of this week's session that will be posted on our website. And I wish you all a blessed and compassionate week ahead, and wishing you all the best. Thanks. Take care.